Hello and welcome to another edition of D&D Stories. My name is Rob, I'm your host, and this is the show where we talk about the time when something cool happened. This is a momentous occasion. This is the concluding chapter of the Shroud. When we last left, Droskor, the dwarven fighter of the Undercroft, and TheWriter, the human ranger of Hemlon, they had just won a mighty victory against the forces of the Mercylands, with a significant amount of help from their incredibly powerful, shape-shifting friend Dracnis. They had won a great victory and defended Valdonor against a host that, without their aid, would have spread into the city and killed all inside. And now the people of Valdonor are paying their respects. They are showing their gratitude for these dragon warriors that drop from the sky on the back of this fell beast, with great wings and jets of fire exploding from its mouth. A number of people are in awe of them. And when we last left them, they had been celebrating. They had been having a heart-to-heart within a tavern late one night, once the revelry of such a victory had died down a little bit. Which obviously took some time, and during that time Droskor and TheWriter had drunk deeply and shared many stories and had come to terms a bit more with the dynamic of their party relationship, shall we say. We cut to the next morning. TheWriter is groggily taking his first drink of the morning, as he always has to keep drinking. That's his curse. And Droskor walks into the dining area of the tavern that they had both collapsed in, essentially. And Droskor hops onto a seat, groggily sort of rubbing his eyes, like the hangover weighing heavily upon him. And he pulls over some food and he begins to eat greedily and with the vigour that only a hangover can really provide. TheWriter looks at Droskor intently as the dwarf continues to shovel large amounts of food into his face. The previous night, the last TheWriter had seen of Droskor, he was disappearing behind some velvet curtains towards the back of the tavern. These velvet curtains signify that Droskor had spent the evening with a lady of the night, shall we say. So, obviously, TheWriter wants the details, and he waits for the right moment and says, "So, Droskor, you, Huh? You had a bit of fun last night, shall we say? A bit of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Say no more, know what I mean?" Very Python-esque. And Droskor just sort of looks at him groggily. Like, Droskor's quite pale, and generally speaking, has quite a tolerance for hangovers, dwarven constitution, being as it is, racial bonuses and all. But he looks quite pale, and Droskor, rather than bragging, says, "Oh, yeah. And he looks as if he has seen something horrific. Droskor, who has seen the horrors of war, now seems a little bit perturbed by this particular line of questioning. "Oh, I don't really want to talk about it," says Droskor, and he sort of rubs what remains of his beard. Remember, half of it was still burnt away. And he sort of, as he does that, he moves his beard slightly, and TheWriter catches sight of something on Droskor's neck. And TheWriter is just sort of taking another swig, and then he does a double take. Droskor has a bite on his neck. Now, that isn't something that's entirely unfamiliar with the activity that Droskor was doing last night. But this bite mark looks fairly peculiar. As a matter of fact, it looks like Droskor has 2 red marks here. The unmistakable sign of fangs. A fang bite. And Theodrex is just staring in horror. Abject horror. Droskor, you have something on your neck. I don't want to talk about it. No, you have... Something's bitten you. And Droskor says, well, yes, I know. No, honestly, you've been bitten. By a thing of the night. It's not very polite to talk about them that way, Theodrex, Droskor says, wiping mead from his mouth. No, you don't understand. Just... And he, like, brings, like, a shard of mirror, and he just, like, points it at Droskor. And the dwarf stares at his reflection, stares at the mark upon his neck, and he goes, oh. And they both look at each other. They both know what this means. You know what this means, dear viewer. Droskor instantly stands, and he marches over to the barkeep, the owner of this establishment, and he says, excuse me, what stranger are you doing? Same barkeep all the time. And Theodrex sort of comes up and stands next to Droskor, obviously wanting to watch this. The woman, Droskor continues, and he sort of points over to the velvet curtains. The one who has an arrangement here. Oh yes, that's right. Old Meg. Oh, Old Meg. Droskor looks over to Theodrex, who's just like, what do you mean, Old Meg? She didn't look old. Well, as I understand it, that certain ladies in that particular industry have glamour, certain ways of hiding their real appearance, if you know what I mean. You don't think it's because she's of a supernatural persuasion? Droskor says, like his eyes fixed on the barkeep, his anger rising inside him. Oh, what do you mean? I mean... It doesn't matter. Do you know where she is? I would have words. And the barkeep says, well, yeah, sure, she's probably still in her quarters, I expect. Come with me, then let's have a look. And they pull open the curtains, and nothing is there. Droskor, in horror, sort of like staggers back. Now, whoever has bitten him, this old Meg, has now vanished. And he feels a little strange. He feels a little woozy. And he's about to object further to the barkeep when in comes a messenger. Ba-ba-ba-ba-bam! And they both have hangovers, so the call of trumpets isn't quite the thing that they want to hear right now, but regardless, they turn. And a hunchman sidles up to them after this grandiose announcement, quite juxtaposed by the grandeur of trumpets. This man sort of hunches forward. Now, this is the individual that had been speaking with Dragon Then, who had been ordered to bring Droskor and Theodrex to him. But they don't know this. They just see this simple hunchback as a messenger and a message he provides. He says, Droskor and Theodrex, your names are being uttered all around this fine city that you helped to defend so valiantly with your draconic powers. The Dragon Warriors, that's what they're calling you. I have a summons from the Knight Captain who bid you to travel west. He would speak with you whilst he is in audience with the king himself. It is a great honour. Will you accompany me? Droskor and Theodrex sort of are looking at him, and they think, this is a bit strange, but they did indeed get sent west because of the orders of the Knight Captain. So they look to each other and say, well, give us a moment, we're going to smarten up. Obviously, we're going to have be in the audience chambers of the king himself. We want to make ourselves look the part. And the hunchback just gives a bow and says, "Come to the gates of the main citadel. There you will be guided to the king's throne room. And there much will be discussed. This city owes you a great debt, and it would seem His Royal Highness is looking to be very generous to the dragon warriors who dropped from the sky. We look forward to your arrival." And they're like, what's wrong with this guy? Why is he seems a little bit strange. We don't want to say evil. We don't want to just lump people in with the evil category, but he seems kind of weird. But always, with Droskor and Theodrex, the prevailing notion is that of reward, of that of coin, of loot, of currency. And so they quite happily prepare themselves for an audience with the king. It isn't long before Theodrex and Droskor have smartened themselves up. Droskor has sort of buffed dents from his armor. Theodrex has had his ranger garb and cloak sort of pressed. Like, they basically give themselves a good wash. Droskor is able to tie his beard in a way where it doesn't look like he's lost half of it to a fire trap. And then they set out. They're walking through the streets of Valdenor, and repair work is already on the way. They can see bustling forces of work, men and women, gathering the debris, salvaging usable rocks that can be used to help rebuild parts of the wall that was shattered by the artillery from the striking barbaric horde. And they're walking along, and Droskor sort of like slowing his pace a little bit, and Theodrex notices this and says, "You appear to be moving even slower than usual, Droskor. Is there a problem?" And he's really digging at him, like he's really having a good time that Droskor has had this unfortunate thing happen to him. And Droskor just gives him a scowl. And Theodrex says, "Now listen, in all seriousness, before we go and address the king and get our rewards and speak to the Knight Captain, quest complete, let's get you to an alchemist. I mean, I've heard many stories about vampires, and I'm not really sure which rules apply. If you've been bitten, does that mean you're going to turn into one yourself?" And Droskor says, "I don't want to talk about it. It's just happened. I'm sure I'll be fine. I'll walk it off." "You'll walk it off," Theodrex says. "You'll walk it off. You can't just walk off a vampire bite. You could turn into a vampire. You could try and eat me tomorrow night, if all I know." Droskor says, "You would be the last person I'm not entertaining this notion. Let's just go to the king, then we will, I suppose, try and sort it out." "Fine," says Theodrex. "All right, let's just get it over with. Fine." And they walk to the main gates of the citadel, where they are guided into the great keep itself. The architecture is the oldest part of this particular city. It has grand towers and spires that reach up into the sky. And upon their arrival, the guards are already waiting for them and cheerfully welcome them. So happy are they to be in the presence of these dragon warriors that saved their city. And Droskor and Theodrex are like, "Yeah, we feel really good about this. We really feel really good that we have such a reputation." I'd long told my players, Matt and Mike, that the more they achieve, the more heroic deeds they commit to within the world, the more the world will respond to them. And they're enjoying this. This is almost part of the reward of playing this game, I suppose, which is the reason why we all love it so much. But anyway, they are moving through these vast halls of this citadel now, and Droskor says, "I'm feeling a little bit nervous, actually. I've only stood before one king, and that was, our king in the Undercroft." And Theodrex just sort of gives him a sideways look and says, "We have no kings where I come from." And Droskor sort of just bites his tongue. "What? You come from Hemlon. And from what I understand, Hemlon is just a small town. Of course you'd have a king in a small town. You must have a king somewhere. Everyone has a king." And Theodrex sort of looks down thoughtfully and says, Maybe. And they continue this sort of inane banter all the way through these halls until eventually they spy the hunchbacked man who is waiting before these vast double doors. And he says, "Ah, dragon warriors, welcome, welcome to the main citadel. I would like to announce you, if you please. Is there anything that you would like to be announced as?" And they look to each other and say, just Theodrex and Droskell's fine. The Dragon Warriors? Okay, the Dragon Warriors is fine, just, you know, okay. And they're trying to play humble, but it isn't really convincing. They don't have much in charisma after all. And the Hunchback says, "At your service, let us proceed. And please, though you are great heroes, do show every courtesy to His Royal Highness, of course." And they go, "Yeah, okay, fine." And the doors open. Our two heroes find themselves stepping into a vast and grand hall. They climb many stairs, and it would appear to them now that they are at the heights of one of these towers that reach into the sky in the citadel. Huge stained glass windows dot a semicircular wall to the back of the room, and in sort of the very, very center of the room, atop a flight of stairs, there is a throne, and upon that throne sits a wizened king with a grand crown upon his head, and he is looking down upon the Knight Captain, the man who had sent Theodrex and Droskell on their adventure. The Knight Captain is kneeling and addressing the king, and they overhear the king's final words to the man, and he's saying, If it was not for you and your quick thinking, we would indeed have had a travesty upon our hands. The city would have fallen if..." "Speak of the devil," he says, looking up. The Hunchback swings into the room with an alarming pace for a man of his stature, and he says, "Your Royal Highness, members of the court, I would like to announce Droskell Hammerstone of the Undercroft and Theodrex, the Ranger of Hemlon, the Dragon Warriors and Saviours of our city." And there are members of court within this hall as well, and they all give a rather stilted round of applause. Just Droskell and Theodrex instantly feel uncomfortable. They have walked into high society, a place that they don't really belong in at all. And the king sort of rises from his throne and he reaches his arms wide and he says, "My friends, friends that I have never met before, but do us the favour, as old allies would. You came to our aid at a great time of need. You and your immense power fought back the forces of evil yesterday. Welcome. Welcome to my hall. Please, stand forth. I would reward you for everything you've done for us." Droskell has gold glinting in his eyes already, and he steps forward. And Theodrex pauses for a moment, then follows. But he looks at the king and he says, "Your Highness, if I would be so bold, I would ask a question before you bestow upon us our reward." And the king looks down upon him and says, "Proceed." Theodrex looks around at the members of court, looks directly at the Knight Captain, who meets his gaze, and the Knight Captain has this very strange kind of vacant look upon his eyes, just staring back. And Theodrex looks back to the king and he says, "Now, indeed we were sent west at the bidding of our Knight Captain here, bidden to investigate strange goings-on in the Valley of the Prophets. Indeed, our purpose was nothing to do with the forces of the Mercylands. That was a distraction, a significant distraction, but a distraction nonetheless. It wasn't really our intention to get involved with that at all." And the king says, "But involved you became regardless, and you helped our fair city. Do I detect hesitance? Do I detect you not wishing to be rewarded for your actions upon the wall?" And Theodrex says, No, of course not. I of course would be honoured by such. I just wanted to make sure that when the histories are written, the facts remain straight. And the king looks with a curious look in his eyes at the Knight Captain and back to Theodrex and Droskor. And he says, all you must do is kneel. Kneel before me. And there is a very real shift of tone in the room. All geniality in the king's voice is gone. And Theodrex and Droskor sort of look to each other. That's sort of their trademark thing. They sort of look to each other to sort of see that they're on the same page, and then they look back and they step forward. Droskor seems to cotton on to Theodrex's point, and he says, it's true, Your Highness. We were actually bidden on some rather secretive business to do with your advisor, Dragon Then, an individual that I do not see in this room right now. And the king just stares at the dwarf for a second, and he says, my advisor is on urgent business north of here. Is that right, Your Highness? Droskor says. We are of the understanding, and we hold no secrets here, he addresses the court, who sort of shift uncomfortably. We were bidden by the Knight Captain because he had some concerns that we fear he lacked the spine to approach you with. And they both look accusingly over at the Knight Captain, who sort of like has his eyes fixed on the ground. Is that so? The king says. Well, first, kneel, and I will allow you to tell me all about it. But first, why don't you take your reward? And he's sort of just looking at them, his eyes willing them to kneel. And they do not. Theodrex looks to the king. It is a concern of ours that we have found this, and he produces the blueprints to the Shroud, these arcane blueprints, the designs of which, if followed correctly, could create some kind of necromantic weapon. We fear that your advisor has been manipulating the kingdom and whoever else in some kind of veiled threat to this land. And he looks around, and no one reacts, and in fact no one really looks surprised. And they see that these sort of vacant expressions are shared by everyone in the court, and by the Knight Captain, and by the king. The king sort of slowly steps once, twice, 3 times down the stairs of his throne to stand at eye level with Theodrex and Droskor. Theodrex meets the king's gaze and holds it, looking into the old man's eyes. And he says, Your Highness, does it not concern you? Does it not concern you that it would appear that your advisor has some kind of cult, this sacred dusk? Does it not concern you that those affiliated with him have these plans? Does it not concern you that you've allowed necromancy to swell within your kingdom? The king looks back at Theodrex and says, It does not concern me, Theodrex of Hemlon. I died 5 days ago. What? Says Theodrex. Yes. 5 days have passed since, in fact, I and the Knight Captain and all of those here perished at the hands of our new master, Dragon Then. And it's only then that, both Theodrex and Droskor begin to see that the glamour magic that has concealed these people's true fates begins to wane. Now they see pallid, dead flesh and empty-looking eyes, the gaze of individuals whose light had left them long ago. What? They say, staring at the king, staring at the knight captain, staring at the members of court, who all begin to slowly approach them. You must understand, a new voice speaks from the king's mouth, that I had to engineer a great battle before the walls of Valdonor. Only through war can the deaths that I require be achieved. I need corpses by the thousands, so when the Shroud covers this land, many will rise in my name, Dragon Then. Theodrex and Droskor look in alarm. These individuals, every single person in this hall, is a dead zombie puppet of this fell necromantic master, who is now pulling the strings of the entirety of the hierarchy of this place. And as they close in around them, Theodrex and Droskor draw their weapons, and I shout, roll initiative. As the battle erupts within the throne room, it all starts to make sense to Theodrex and Droskor. They now begin to understand why all of the military forces in Orinthale have been withdrawn to Valdonor at the order, the behest of a court that had been compromised. So, as many soldiers as possible could die on the walls of Valdonor. And as this king, speaking with the fell voice of Dragon Then, taunts at them, Theodrex and Droskor are already on the back foot. They're uneasy, as Theodrex takes shot after shot with his bow, and Droskor swings wildly with his Zergrosh into the members of court. They are hesitant to attack the king. I can tell that my players are hesitant because they still think that there might be some way to save them. But I unfortunately inform them that there is no saving these people. They have indeed been dead for some time, and are now merely puppets in the game that Dragon Then has been playing all this time. And while Theodrex ducks under a sword swing from the zombie knight captain and backs away across one side of the throne room, Droskor's swings are slightly less effective than they usually are. Mechanically, Droskor is suffering from the early stages of succumbing to vampirism, and he is tired and he is exhausted, as if he hadn't rested at all from the battle before. It's almost like he isn't able to rest properly until that particular issue is amended. And it's beginning to show. Blow after blow rains down upon Droskor, and while he wears his heavy spiked dwarven armour, soon the numbers are becoming too much for them. Something drastic has to occur. The knight captain takes another violent swing at Theodrex, who ducks but is pushed over after a failed grapple attempt. He falls onto the floor, onto his back, as the knight captain looms over him, shining sword in hand. In Theodrex's mind, he remembers that the knight captain seemed like a decent man. He didn't know him particularly well, but he seemed like someone who just wanted to do his job. And it is with remorse that from the ground, Theodrex holds his bow horizontally, draws it, and says, "I'm sorry." And he lets go. He lets the arrow fly, and it just shoots through the knight captain's jaw and out the back of his head. And he just is frozen for a moment, groaning, before his zombie-like form topples back onto the ground. Droskor takes another violent swing with his Zergrosh, cleaving through 2 or 3 more members of court. Their bodies are now strewn about the dwarven fighter as he commits to his grim work. And all the while, he's still backing away from this elderly, frail king who's reaching out with both arms. The fell voice of Dragon Then still echoing from the old king's mouth. You did not really think that an alcoholic ranger and a pathetic, traitorous dwarf could really stop Dragon Then and the sacred dusk. And Droskor looks at him with furious eyes, and he replies, Your puppets have betrayed you, Then. This king's last act was to tell us exactly where you are. And it could be a trick of the light, but there seems to be a small flicker of doubt within the dead king's eyes. The king said you had business north, necromancer. And that is where we will find you. And with a swinging uppercut, Droskor just cleaves the king's face with his Urgrosh. The elderly, frail king is decimated by the attack. Just as the doors swing open to reveal the royal guard alerted by this uproar within the throne room. And they spot the dwarven fighter cleaving their king dead. And Droskor looks to Theodrex. And Theodrex looks to Droskor. The ranger looks to the stained glass windows at Droskor's back. And he says, Give me a boost! What? Says Droskor, immediately alarmed at not entirely knowing what Theodrex's plan is. But the ranger has already started sprinting towards the dwarf, and there is no psychic connection between these two. Droskor has no idea what Theodrex is about to do, but regardless, he gets ready with the traditional hand gesture of the boost, and Theodrex jumps into Droskor, and then he is hurled at the stained glass window. Theodrex smashes through this ornate window and then disappears out of view. Droskor takes one final look at the remaining zombie members of court and the royal guard that charged them, and he hurls himself out the window also. Now, my dear viewers, those who have been listening carefully will remember that this particular throne room is at the top of a particularly tall tower of the Citadel. In fact, it is probably the largest tower, or at least one of the largest towers in the Citadel. And Theodrex, I mean, it was a cool exit in retrospect. Cool that they smashed out of a window heroically. However, sadly, Theodrex and Droskor still have the rules of the game to contend with, and they fall. They fall, and they fall, and they fall, and I look to my players, Matt and Mike, and I say, listen guys, you are great adventurers, and you have achieved many great things, but I'm afraid to say that even you are going to struggle to survive this experience. You've just leapt out of one of the tallest towers in the entire land. I say, look, I'm going to make this fair. And I say, each of you take a d6 and roll it. If you get a 1 or a 2, you're going to fall straight to the bottom and smash into the cobblestones. If you roll a 3 and a 4, you're going to hit a ledge halfway down, and it's going to reduce some of your damage, and you'll basically like tumble down the side of the Citadel, and you'll take less. 5, you're going to land upon an iron fence, which will do significantly more damage. And 6, you will land in a large hay cart, a la Assassin's Creed, and take no damage whatsoever, because that's a thing. And they uneasily take up their d6s, and I say, Theodrex, you jumped out of the window first, roll it. Matt, who plays TheWriter, takes his d6 and he rolls it. And he gets a 1. Which means that TheWriter falls straight out of the tower and slams painfully into the cobblestones, onto the ground. Miraculously, the damage doesn't kill him. TheWriter had not taken any damage or any real damage in the brief battle above in the throne room. So he just smashed a broken man upon the ground, but alive. Then I say, Droskor, your turn. And Mike, who plays Droskor, rolls his d6. And it's a 1. And Mike, who plays Droskor, looks across the table at me and says, does that mean... And I look back and I say, oh yes. Smash! The full weight of a heavily armoured dwarf smashes on top of Theodrex of Hemlon, and he is killed instantly. This is the thing about Dungeons and Dragons. You'll be playing and you will have this soaring, epic story. This one, for instance, Theodrex and Droskor are escaping the undead menace to heroically meet Dragon Then in a battle for the fate of Orenthale. Only they stupidly jump out of a window and the weight of one of the characters kills the other. Droskor miraculously still has some health left. That dwarven constitution coming into play once again. And he is able to lift himself up and look down in horror at the bloody splattered remains of Theodrex, his companion, his brother-in-arms. He has just crushed his best friend to death with his own weight, and he's just looking at his hands and he's touching his, blood's everywhere, like it's seeping in between the cobbles, like he spits out like teeth that have shattered from his mouth from the impact, like he is broken, he is clearly on the verge of death himself, like he's only got like a few hit points left and he just doesn't know what to do, and he's like, Moradin's beard, Theodrex, what have I done? And this is the character's reaction. However, Mike, who plays Droskor, is laughing hysterically. I've never seen an individual laugh as hard as Mike that fateful evening when Theodrex of Hemlon met the full force of a falling dwarf. And hysterics, absolute hysterics. Me, as the dungeon master, I can't help it. I start laughing too. Matt, bless him, who plays Theodrex, beloved Theodrex, is just stunned. Absolutely stunned at this. And I thought I'd been quite fair, considering they both jumped out, you know. I gave them a chance to roll and see, like, considering it was a stupid thing to do, I thought I'd been quite generous. Yet, the worst thing had happened. The dice had fallen, and they'd fallen where they may, and now Droskor has a new challenge on his hand. The bells are ringing. Alarms have been sent through the citadel, and high alert has been called. Now, Droskor, thinking back later on, is confident that perhaps they won't be framed for the death of the king, because there's all those undead bodies, and you'll be able to, you know, prove that those bodies were dead long before Theodrex and Droskor had even walked into that room. But regardless, in the heat of the moment, they consider themselves, or at least Droskor considers themselves, to be fugitives at this point. Matt is in the corner flicking through the player's handbook, wondering what character he's going to be next, as Droskor determinedly grabs hold of the remains, what remains of Theodrex of Hemlon, and begins dragging him through the streets to try and get into cover somewhere. People are screaming around them, like seeing this dwarf who's broken from battle and from the fall, dragging this husk, this broken remains of this ranger. And eventually, Droskor is able to drag TheWriter into an alleyway, and we have to take pause for a moment. And Mike agrees that he's going to do his best to try and drag TheWriter somewhere where perhaps help can be made. But I'm looking at him and I'm saying, listen, there are ways that your characters can be brought back from death in Dungeons and Dragons. We're in a world populated by magical creatures and magical characters that, you know, a rare few of them have this power, but it's rare. It's not common. If resurrection spells are at every church and every temple around every corner, then death isn't a threat anymore. This is something that is a heavy toll, and you're not really in a position where you're going to be able to really help at this point. TheWriter of Hemlon is dead by your hand. Or by your bulk. As I mentioned before, Dungeons and Dragons is a game fraught with the danger of chance. But every now and then, chance can fall on the side of the player characters. Droskor is dragging the remains of TheWriter through a particularly dark alleyway, when all of a sudden a door bursts open, and an old man, wizard with a long grey beard and a bald head and eyebrows that sprout out to his sides and curl on the side of his head, he explodes out of the door, this old man, and goes, "You there! I know who you are! Please, come in quickly! I shall give you shelter." Droskor is just, at this point, he is exhausted. He is obviously wounded from the fall, from the fight, and also every now and then clutching his neck. I'm telling Droskor, I'm telling Mike who plays him, you know, you're starting to feel really, really bad from a number of different effects upon your person, and it's almost like the sunlight is beginning to burn your eyes. Droskor gratefully drags TheWriter inside, putting his trust in a complete stranger, something that Droskor hasn't done to this point. Inside this ramshackled old building off the side of this alleyway, Droskor collapses to the ground next to the lifeless form of TheWriter, and he's breathing deeply, and it takes him a moment as he's clutching his neck to fully take in his surroundings. He sees that there are a large amount of vials and alchemical apparatus dotted around the room. There is a fire roaring beneath a cauldron, and there seems to be all sorts of different ingredients dotted around, and the strange symbol of a sun as well, sort of carved into different bits of memorabilia that this old man has about his abode. This old man sweeps in front of Droskor as he's sort of like slumped on the floor, and he says, "I know who you are. You are the Dragon Warriors. It would seem that Valdemar owes you a great debt, and it would seem so do I." Now, Droskor has taken a chance on this stranger and has taken him up on shelter, but this seems a little bit too convenient. "I just want to help my friend. I'm afraid there is no hope for your friend. He appears to be quite dead." And he says it quite untactfully, and Droskor sort of scowls, and he goes to make a move, but too exhausted he can't rise to his feet. "My name is Metrid. I have not been here long, but I understand that there is dark work afoot within this city." Droskor looks at him with suspicion, mounting suspicion at this point, and says, "Well, how do you know that?" "I was once of a specific order, a powerful order that would bring about the end of necromancy if we have our way. We work to fight the dark forces of this world. And it would seem those dark forces operate here within the city. Droskor just stares at the old man incredulously for a moment, and then he finally breaks the silence and says, "You are part of an order that has sworn to defend this realm from necromancy. Yet you live in this hovel surrounded by all kinds of strange paraphernalia. And you haven't been working against the forces of the Sacred Dusk? You haven't been working against Dragon then? What have you been doing?" "A fair question," Metroid responds. "I am merely one man, and I am old. And if truth be told, I am an outcast of the order I spoke of, the Wardens of the Sun." "Why were you outcast?" Droskor growls, mistrust growing even further. "I was outcast because I deemed it necessary to use the power of the enemy against it, to use dark magic against dark magic." Now I know what you're going to do and say. He raises a hand as Droskor appears to panic. "I am no necromancer. I think it is a blight upon all of the schools of magic. But some things must be done, no matter the cost." And it's then that Droskor is heaving himself to his feet, and he says, "I don't have time for this. Me and Theodrex, we set out for reward and for riches, but now, if I don't complete this quest, this journey, I will have failed him. I blame myself for his death." And Mike actually says that, and we kind of just like, well, obviously you blame yourself for his death. You landed on him. But Metroid, the character within the game, however, looks upon him far more kindly, and he says, "I understand you have lost someone close to you. Of course, be it." And he looks as Droskor is turning away, and he sees the two fang marks upon Droskor's neck, and he goes, "Wait! Wait! Stop there! You have been bitten. You are potentially a vampire?" Droskor says, "No, I'm not a vampire, but I could very well turn into one ever so shortly, so if you're such an expert on the undead, please impart your knowledge, because..." And Metroid rises a finger and says, "Stop! You have not yet become a Nightspawn. You have not yet become a fell terror of the darkness." "Yes. It could just work." And Metroid starts busying around, grabbing apparatus from all around his alchemical lab. And Droskor looks with like a confused stare as the old man bustles backwards and forwards, and he says, "What is it that you're doing?" And Metroid turns and gives him a wizened smile and says, "Saving your friend." Long and arduous preparations are made. Droskor is asked to remove his armor by Metroid, and he doesn't really like the idea, but there's something about the old man that makes him think that perhaps they have a chance. Perhaps they can indeed use the power of necromancy against the forces of the Sacred Dusk. And so Metroid explains that a blood transfusion is required. Droskor's blood is going to be funneled through tubes from his body into Theodrex's lifeless form. He is going to be brought to the edge of death. And then, perhaps, with some hope and an awful lot of luck, Theodrex may return. But, Metroid continues, this will be a risky process, and I will have to be ready to give a blessing, one that will rid you of vampirism, but bring your friend back to the edge of living. Droskor doesn't really understand what's going on. And he's still a bit annoyed, by the way, that there is this anti-necromancy order that they're just hearing about. And this is communicated to me by my players. They're like, where's this order been this whole time we've been trying to fight this necromantic threat? And I said, well, you immediately left the city. And they looked at me dumbfounded. I was like, yeah, maybe ask some questions next time. Look around. What transpires over the next night is something that Droskor will never forget. As he grows weaker and weaker, as blood is slowly drained from him, this blood tainted with the power of vampirism, Droskor thinks back to the first time he had met Theodrex, how they had fought side by side within the inn when the orcs first struck, how they had journeyed, bickered and fought their way to Valdenor, how they had travelled and delved deep into the Valley of the Prophets, how they had faced off the forces of the Sacred Dusk and the Flesh Golem. They had seen the barricade fall, they had witnessed the psychedelic horrors of the Windward Plains, and they had seen war brought to the very centre of the land they are trying to save. All of these visions flash before his eyes as Droskor gradually begins to succumb to the vampiric curse, and he looks over with weak eyes, barely keeping them open, trying to stay focused on his friend, trying to see if any form of life is about the ranger. And slowly he closes his eyes and he sees nothing at all. How much time passes, Droskor does not know, but when he opens his eyes, they sting. But he is breathing. He feels like himself, but he can't move. He goes to make a sudden thrust forward and he realizes that he's actually buckled to the table that he had been placed upon for the transfusion to occur. He has fleeting images of an insatiable hunger, a lust for blood, nearly overtaking him, but then it ebbing away to a gentle flow until this predator-like power is upon him no more. Droskor is able to look across the room, and there is Theodrex. His eyes are open, and he is alive. So we kind of hijacked the random encounter that Droskor had experienced by being bitten by a vampire, and used that, and it fit with the theme of the campaign. So it didn't feel too kind of Deus Ex Machina bringing Theodrex back in this form. And trust me, Theodrex dies a lot. Theodrex and Droskor stand up respectively, and gingerly, weakly they approach each other, and they put out a hand like that and grab like that and pull each other into an embrace. And Droskor rather creepily whispers in Theodrex's ear, "My blood is yours now, brother." And Theodrex is like, "Yes, I suppose it is. Thank you, Droskor. I feel strange, as if I was somewhere else." And he closes his eyes and he tries to remember fleeting images. Theodrex willingly tries to remember what he had seen, but he can't recall it. Not yet, anyway. Etrid, the old wizened individual, steps forward and says, "I hate to interrupt, but I believe there is something you should see." And he opens the door, and Theodrex and Droskor look out, and what they see is a sky bleached white, and strange black oily clouds roll across the skyline. "What's happened?" says Theodrex. "How long have we been like this?" Metrid looks to them and says, 3 nights. And Droskor and Theodrex just bury their faces in their hands again. They have been out of action for a number of days, and things have happened in the world whilst they have continued resting or being healed or hijacking the vampiric rules to somehow bring Theodrex back into the world of the living. They look to the horizon, and to the very north they see that these oily black wave-like clouds appear to be sort of converging around the top of a incredibly tall mountain that reaches high into the air. Now, they have known the name of this mountain for some time. At the beginning of every campaign, I provide the players with a map, and they have had their eye on this mountain for some time. It has loomed like a shadow in the north, and it is known as Drenan Fowl, the tallest mountain in the land. And they look to the blueprints that they've had all this time. They look to the Shroud diagram and essentially see that if this foul necromantic weapon is to be assembled, its maximum potential would be reached if it can reach out as far as it can, and that requires height. Metrid is looking over their shoulders at this abomination of black energy roiling in the sky. "If you have any chance of stopping him, you must leave immediately. I would help, but..." And he slumps to the ground, and Theodrex and Droskor turn around and they see that this old man has just collapsed, and they grab him and they put him onto the table where Droskor had laid. "What's the matter?" "You needed blood to sustain you. As you gave it to your friend, I gave mine to you, Droskor." And they can see that he's incredibly pale. "It seems to me that you are our best chance of stopping him. I am old, and while I have my alchemy and my experiments, I would be no match against such power. But this..." And he reaches into his shirt and he pulls out what looks like a medallion, and it bears that same sun symbol that he has adorned around different places of his lab. "You must present this and hold it forth to the darkness that permeates at the heart of the Shroud." And he gives it to Droskor. Droskor looks at it and then looks at Metrid, and he gives a nod to Theodrex. "Thank you," says Theodrex. "Thank you for everything that you've done." "Not at all. You can repay me by saving the realm." Theodrex looks at Droskor, and Droskor looks at Theodrex, and they smile. And so we have reached the climax of the campaign. Droskor and Theodrex head north, alone beneath the bleached white sky. Those inky black clouds all being inexorably drawn to the mountain peak, to Drenan Fowl. And along their way, they encounter many great threats sent to them by the fell necromancer Dragon Thin. He has risen those orcs that have died in battle. There are great hordes of ghouls that swarm towards them, but our heroes cut through them and are triumphant. It is upon their third day of travelling that they reach the base of the mountain and they begin to ascend, and yet more forces are being sent against them. They are working on a time limit. The Shroud is essentially extending its reach across Orenthale, and soon all creatures that have died recently will rise up. All of those that died in the battle will become the pawns of the Necromancer and add to his already swelling forces. As they climb the mountain, they come across cultists of the Sacred Dusk that charge at them with vile, serrated, ceremonial blades. But now Theodrex and Droskor are in their element. They are driven, they are determined, and yet again they cut through these vile individuals. Nothing will stop them from reaching the summit of the mountain. They only hope that they will make it in time. And as they are climbing up the last rock face, heaving their exhausted forms onto a rock, they look up and they see that the very spire, the very top of the mountain is flattened out, and they see it. This vile necromantic superweapon, this archway with foul jutting spikes, the Shroud, the very thing that has brought them on this journey. And they see the black inky energy swirling above it, and this white negative space in the archway itself. And beyond it, stood upon a ruin, looking down upon them, is the Necromancer himself. Dragon then, bold, with tattoos across his face and tattered black ceremonial robes. He has a maddened look in his eye, and he says, "It would seem I underestimated you, but I shall not make the same mistake again." "It's over, Necromancer," Theodrex says, pulling his bow from his back and aiming an arrow directly at Dragon then. No. It has only begun." And a mad smile begins to creep across the Necromancer's face. "If you disrupt the attunement of the Shroud now, vast extra-dimensional forces will rip this mountain apart." "Good," says Droskor. "It was a bitch to climb." And they both charge Dragon then, and I say, for the final time in this campaign, roll initiative. Dragon then is a powerful magical individual, and he sends just blasts of blackened energy towards our heroes. Theodrex is able to roll and dart behind some of the ruins that dot the top of this mountain, and Droskor runs straight down the line, basically hoping to draw all the fire towards him so Theodrex can basically start unleashing hell from a distance. Droskor almost reaches Dragon then when a blast of blackened magical energy hits him square in the chest, and he is flung backwards and he smashes into the Shroud itself. He looks up and he sees wisps of energy whirling about it. He realizes that he can't get too close to it, otherwise something bad could definitely happen. But at the same time, it needs to be destroyed. It needs to be stopped. Droskor looks up to Theodrex, who is now climbing up onto the ruins, pursuing Dragon then, who is also trying to scale higher. One, trying to get cover from Theodrex's arrows, but also away from the angry dwarf with the really big axe. Theodrex takes a shot as he leaps over a gap in the ruins to clear the distance a little bit more, trying to close in on the Necromancer. The arrow hits Then directly in the shoulder, and he gives a grrr, and he unleashes hell upon Theodrex, and I ask him to make a Constitution saving throw as he points the finger of death at him. Fortunately, Theodrex is able to resist and takes the sort of damage that you get when you succeed. It's a nasty spell, as I recall. But regardless, he's still going, he's still fighting. Droskor at this point is standing next to the Shroud, looking up as Theodrex is struggling with the Necromancer, and then looks back to the fell necromantic weapon. He can either attack the necromancer or bring his axe down upon this thing to try and break it, and then he remembers. He pulls out the medallion that Metroid had gave him and looked into it. He doesn't know how to use it, but yet it seems that in the presence of this vile black magic, the amulet comes alive. It begins to spin wildly like a clockwork, intricate mechanism, and it opens, and there's this golden light that begins to pour from it. It is like a reaction, an instinct that Dragon Then has. He senses this power and he looks down with furious anger upon the dwarf, who is looking sort of cluelessly at this magical item in his hand. Dragon then goes, "No!" and he fires like a blast of powerful energy towards the dwarf, who is able to hurl himself out of the way as like the ground he was standing on exploded. At this point, Theodrex is next to the necromancer. He draws his blade and brings it down with a swipe. But the necromancer is too quick for him. He is a well-practiced combat magician, it seems. Like he's able to just bring up a ward, mage armor essentially, to block the attack. Now Dragon Then has reached a level of rage they have never seen before. In his eyes they appear to be blazing with black fire. And he looks at the ranger with vile contempt, and he raises his hand and he shows just why he's got to be in the position he is in now. He reaches forth with a telekinetic grasp and lifts Theodrex into the air off the ruins and just smashes him off the ruins down onto the ground next to the shroud, next to the archway. Droskor gives a bellow, "Theodrex!" and he basically uses his movement to try and get to the necromancer. Like he gives up on trying to use this item on the shroud just now. All this time I'm asking Mike, who plays Droskor, to make certain checks to see if he can work out how to use it. In 3.5 it was a use magic device, but I was being generous, allowing him to do basically basic intelligence tests just to see like what he needs to do with this thing, and he can't work it out. So instead he decides to close the distance with the necromancer, who is then able to whirl about and reach out once again. He fires off another blast of necromantic energy and uses quickened meta magic and hurls. He basically just grabs the dwarf and just hurls him off the mountainside. And the dwarf goes flying. Theodrex rises up, seeing that Droskor is basically plummeting to his death and he can't help him in any way. So in fury, abject fury, Theodrex just rushes against the necromancer. There's one problem that wizards have always had in Dungeons and Dragons, and that is they are squishy, and Theodrex is able to just seize the necromancer, who looks around and he says, "Get your profane hands off me!" And Theodrex just brings down a shuddering headbutt onto the bridge of the necromancer's nose. He goes, "Ahow!" And Theodrex is able to just shove the necromancer into the negative space that is in the shroud, and he gives a howl as he is almost locked into position by the archway's power. The necromancer is screaming. Meanwhile, I asked Droskor to make a reflex save. He is soaring through the air. The amulet, gleaming with golden light, is spinning in front of him. I say, "You've got to make a reflex save. You've got to try and catch it. You get one shot." Droskor reaches forward. Mike rolls a dice. He succeeds. He seizes the magical item, this amulet. It now blazes with golden light. I say, "You've got to make the check this time, Mike, otherwise you're just going to fall and this device isn't going to work." He rolls the dice. He rolls well enough. The thing bursts into life, and as Droskor is plummeting from the mountainside, he is able to twist his body and point this amulet directly into the heart of the shroud, as Dragon Then is reaching forth, trying to drag Theodrex with him. This blazing golden light envelops him and the shroud. He gives a shriek. No! Dust hangs in the air, debris falls from the sky, and TheWriter is standing upon the very summit of Drennenfall, and he is alone. The shroud has been utterly decimated. Dragon Then evaporated within its fell power as it collapsed in on itself. The necromancer wasn't wrong, however. The dark powers that required this thing to even exist meant it drew upon many multi-dimensional anchors that had ripped parts of reality apart when this thing went up. But thankfully, this magical amulet from Metroid was able to counter the spell effects. After all, every spell can be countered by its antithesis. And this restoration, this healing light, was the very thing required to quell the darkness within the heart of the Shroud. But there is no sign of Droskor anywhere. He is gone. And as we come to the end of this story, the end of this particular adventure, TheWriter is desperately looking down the mountainside for his friend who gave his life's blood for him. Droskor is nowhere to be seen. And alone, he begins his descent down the mountain. And there we have it! The first adventure that occurred in Main Realm. The first game that I ran for my best friends at university had come to an end. My friends found it really enjoyable, and it was all that was required to get them hooked with this wonderful hobby. And next up, it was time for my friend Mike, who played Droskor Hammerstone, to take the mantle of Dungeon Master. So, in the next edition of D&D Stories, I will present to you the tale of Devil's Line. Until that time, if you like this video, give it a like. If you'd like to see more like it, then definitely subscribe. And remember, most importantly, keep gaming.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out the D&D Stories Facebook, Patreon, and t-shirts on Redbubble. Keep gaming!